What is up, guys? Pastor Matheny here, and thank you for joining me today in my study. So there's lots of commentary all over about the world kind of coming apart. You can see all over on the news, on the internet, social media, places like that, where there's increasing concern about polarization in our society. The fact that it seems that more and more often, along all kinds of issues, political, social, philosophical, people are divided into sort of two-ish camps, and it seems like in every way, if you're on this team, then you think this way about all these different particular issues, and if you're on this team, then you think this way about all these particular issues. And there seems to be increasingly, in the mind of commentators, anyways, no common ground between us, and increasingly an inability to talk to each other, to even converse about the details or the particulars of given issues, because again, we are polarized, this side and this side. And, it seems to me that there's plenty of room for concern about this and discussion and wondering about what we should or can do about that. But I think that our congregational memory verse, actually for this month, speaks pretty acutely to the issue of polarization and division, not only in our society, and not only in our country, not only politically in our world, but even to the division that we have within ourselves. So here's our congregational memory verse for this month. This is Colossians chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So this is a meditation by the Apostle Paul on the majesty, the impact, the meaning of our Lord Jesus Christ. It's a reflection on who he is as God the Son. He is the image of the invisible God. He is the one who pre-existed everything else, who stands in a way transcendent from all other things, utterly separate and divided from all things, and yet he entered his creation in the incarnation to become the image of the invisible God. And by him all things were created, and also for him all things were created. And when he extrapolates all things being heaven, that is spiritual things, on earth, that is material things, visible and invisible, whether the things that can be seen are like rocks and trees and birds that are easily perceptible to the human eye, or whether they are invisible, like mathematical computations or the realities of physics and astronomy in our world, whether they are spiritual things that are beyond perception by human senses. All things were made by him. And to be clear, he is over all things. And so he says, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities of all sorts, all things were created through him and for him. That is, by his power all things were made, and in the end, all things were made all things that have been made were made for him. That is, all things find their fulfillment ultimately, finally, completely in him. And he is before all things. That is not just that he precedes all things in time, but he is the author of all things. He is the source of all things. He is the one to which all things find their beginning, and eventually all things find their end in him. That is, he is before all things in terms of time, but also in terms of primacy or importance. All things are dependent, you might say, on him. And so he sort of concludes this section sort of by saying, and in him all things hold together. In him all things hold together. And to this issue of polarization, of division, of even instances of disunity and strife in our communities, in our country, in our families, and in our lives, St. Paul here makes clear that in him, in our Lord Jesus Christ, all things hold together. And so in a world where very often things feel like they are coming apart, and even when things look like they are coming apart, the fact of the matter is that in our Lord Jesus Christ, and by the power of his word and in the working of his church, all things hold together. And so as much as our country, our nation, and like I said before, even our own lives can feel like they are pulling apart, we confess and believe and acknowledge that in the end, in our Lord Jesus Christ, because of who he is and what he has done for this world, in the shedding of his blood, in his death, and in his eternal and everlasting resurrection from the dead, all things hold together. Though they might seem to be falling apart, though they often feel like they are falling apart, because of our Lord Jesus Christ and in him, all things hold together. So, brothers and sisters, know today that in our Lord Jesus Christ and because of him, your life today coheres and holds together. And through and by his work in your life, the whole world, the whole creation, all things, whether thrones or dominions or powers or authorities, all things ultimately and finally will hold together. So God bless you today. Thank you for joining me in my study, and I hope to see you all again soon. Peace.